Good morning to everybody. And for our research team, we ask ourselves, how can we measure agricultural development? And for example, could we consider that the use of human feces to fertilize cropland could be considered as a characteristic of a modern agriculture? So we know that for traditional agrarian historians, the proxies to know if an agriculture is modern is they used to take into account only crop yields and technical change. But in the context of ecological crisis, environmental historians consider that they challenge this old perspective, and they consider that agriculture takes place into an agro-ecosystem. So what is an agro-ecosystem? An agro-ecosystem is an ecosystem that is transformed through the work and through the information that the farm communities apport to the ecosystem. And then we change the perspective that agrarian historians used to use, and we think that we have to take into account that there is a strong link between nature and human. So we don't take into account only crop yields, but we take into account another quantity of indicators. So, so we understand agricultural history as a co-evolution between nature and humans, and that's why we consider that we have to know more about how this ecosystem functions to know which are the limits, which are the possibilities or impossibilities of agrarian innovation. So for us, it's one of the main concepts that we use is the concept of social metabolism. And metabolism is a concept that was used first in physiologist discipline, and it was used to mean the material exchanges within a body in relation to respiration processes. But then this concept of metabolism was spread and was used by many other disciplines. And nowadays we use it, we use the definition that Fischer-Kowalski made, and the definition we use consider that the metabolism of a social system are all the material and energy exchanges that take place in a social system.
So, what we study? We study the transition from the organic agricultures to the agriculture that we know today, what we call the industrialized agriculture. And we use three methodologies. I explained two. First of all, is the energy balances, because we can understand agriculture as a process transforming the energy of the sun into energy available for humans, which is to say food or fuel, for example. And it's a common place to say that industrialized agriculture is more efficient than the pre-industrial agriculture. But if you do the energy analysis, what you see is that industrialized agriculture is less efficient in energy terms than pre-industrial agriculture. And why is it that? This is because energy inputs that you need to increase yields are not proportional to the increase in production that you get. And so what we have is that for first time in history, this process of agriculture is being a consumer of energy instead of a producer of energy. And moreover, fossil fuels are a finite source. So we can say that this process, this way of doing agriculture is a parenthesis in human history. So what we are doing is to use historical data to see if the pre-industrial agricultures were able to increase yields only with organic energy sources. And our second methodology is nutrient cycle, to analyze the nutrient cycle. Because in 19th century, the low prices allow massive grain imports from the States to Europe. And this distance from producer centers to consumer centers produced a rift in the nutrient cycle. And this has two consequences. First, the soil loss of fertility. And then second, pollution problems in cities. Then in 20th century, what we have with the worldwide agribusiness, we don't need to integrate livestock and crops for feeding livestock in the same farm because we can import them. So the pollution problems exacerbated. We know this in Catalonia. We have the purines problem, right? But what about the fertility? The fertility was solved because of synthetic fertilizers. But what are we studying? We use historical data to see if pre-industrial agricultures without synthetic fertilizers were still able to increase yields. And third methodology.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about the third methodology, which is the surface analysis. For the surface analysis, we don't use the ecosystem as in the theory because it's very difficult to determine which limits has the ecosystem. So we will use the landscape analysis because it's easier to define the limits of the landscape. Then, talking about agriculture and land management has no sense, at least till the last century, without talking about surface analysis. This is because agro-ecosystems reproduce themselves due all the interactions between land uses. And these interactions, what generates is complexity for the system. So with all the energy loops and nutrient loops inside the system, we have more complexity, and this complexity gives a resilience to our systems. Nowadays, what happened is that with the industrial agriculture, we don't have energy loops inside the system. We don't have relations between forest and grazing lands, between grazing lands and orchards, or with orchards and cereal. We don't have these interactions, so we have a linear system, only inputs and outputs in every land use. Then landscape hosts a biodiversity level which can be measured with the landscape metrics. So the higher habitats and the better connectivity between habitats will give us better biodiversity of our landscape. So we can also talk about the complexity of the landscape. If we analyze one of our study cases, which is in the Vallès County, we can see that in 19th century, what we had is agroforestry mosaic, where a lot of different land uses were merged, and there were a lot of interactions between these land uses. What we have now in 1999 was a polarized landscape where forest was in the less productive areas and the agriculture is in the more productive areas. But there is no relation between these land uses, so there is less complexity and less biodiversity. And this carries us to our next step, which is the intermediate disturbance hypothesis. We are trying to validate this hypothesis, which says that in the agroforestry mosaic systems, the biodiversity was higher even than in the non-disturbed areas. And why is this? This is because of the complexity. So, where are we now? We are now in a system where there is a lot of human appropriation of the resources and a very low level of biodiversity. So, if we want to change our agro-ecosystems, we will have to return back to higher biodiversity levels with sustainable appropriation of our resources. Thank you very much, and moltes gràcies per deixar-nos participar. Ah, sí. Moltes gràcies per deixar-nos participar.